Or start this. So TVille is one of, help me get this podcast locked off. So I feel like right now sitting at the table are some of the originators of podcasting on call, which is fucking awesome. It just like came to me right now. But welcome back to the show. Where do we begin? I mean, I feel like you've been on quite an adventure. Doc, you've been on quite an adventure. Who wants to go? What's been going on?
I don't know, man. Well, I haven't seen you in like what?
Two
Got 2 weeks.
Yeah, since the last time that we did a podcast.
And I understand that now you are a certified engineer.
Yeah.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Say that. Yeah.
Thank you, man.
So it seems like we've all been through some sort of progression, right?
Right.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. But yeah.
But so I was telling Dr. Mike before you came in, I thought you already started your PhD program.
Yeah.
Because it's been about a year, right? Since I thought I saw you announce it and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But you're about to leave.
I'm about to leave. Yeah. So a couple life things. I don't know. My mom passed away last year, so that was a bit of a delay on my schedule. But it's all good.
Yeah.
It's life. Yeah.
For sure.
So
What are you gonna go get your PhD in?
comm studies. Yeah.
In podcasting.
In podcasting, yeah.
Really?
No.
Oh, I was like, dang.
That's probably part of it.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What does that entail, though?
So, comm studies PhD.
Yeah.
Writing a dissertation
And
and research.
But
Yeah.
tell me about your dissertation, about what you're planning to study and talk about, because it is relevant for.
Yeah, for
very
sure,
true, very
for
true.
sure.
Okay. I just didn't know like how in depth you guys wanted to go.
in depth. We got
Go for
time. We got nothing but time.
Do it.
Yeah. So I mean, I don't know. You might find it interesting, like given what we do, right?
Yeah.
So this is sort of like an alternative media format. Basically, my research is about how mainstream media promotes the status quo, and the status quo being colonization. So in what ways linguistically, structurally, does mainstream media contribute to colonization?
How would
And
you?
how?
Oh,
Go
sorry,
ahead.
go ahead.
No, and so like how we through utilizing digital media are able to write against that, or talk against that.
Like moving against the grain in a sense. Yeah.
Yeah.
Or just giving an alternative view to everything that's going on.
Right.
How would you say? I was gonna say, how would you say that it? How would you say that mainstream media is kind of giving that view of?
Well, it's agenda driven, right? So
agenda driven? Well, dude, I'm pretty sure you guys don't like Noam Chomsky.
Go full Chomsky and just go full.
yeah. Hey, Doc, can
Alright.
you just turn your mic? Talk to the side of it.
Oh.
Yeah. Matt, go ahead and adjust. Can you adjust his mic?
Your assistant.
There we go.
Your digital
Like
assistant.
that?
There we go. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Bring it down. Okay.
He wants to see your pretty face, bro.
Okay. Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
You should be talking into the audio tech,
Where it says
brand.
Audio Technica.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. but you're good.
Yeah.
Okay, go ahead.
Sorry. But
Yeah. So we're gonna go full Chomsky here, and you never go full Chomsky, right? But yeah. So basically, back in the '70s, right? During the or late '60s, during the height of like the Vietnam War, there's this guy Noam Chomsky, and everyone forgets the other guy's name, but his name is Edward S. Herman.
Okay.
But they introduced this model called the propaganda model, and it talks about how mainstream media perpetuates hegemonic ideas, so ruling class ideas, right? So he called them filters. There's 5 filters. One of them is like the economic constraints. So like the fact that mainstream media survives because of corporate advertisements. They're able to be bought out. Their interests can be bought out.
Right.
The other is the fact that they have to rely on a certain group of people for their messages. So I'm a journalist, as you know, right? So on any given day, let's say I was covering an issue about poverty. So my editor would say, I want you to talk to this senator. She's doing stuff with poverty and labor. So I want you to go talk to her. I want you to go talk to.
Is it based on interests of the publishing company, or is it on the interests of
the elite? Yeah, the ruling classes.
The controllers.
Yeah, in any given context. So you can, the great thing about the propaganda model is that it's so malleable. You can use it to suit whatever context you're in. So obviously in a Guam context, I'm going to talk about
It's a formula.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah. And it's up to you to be able to apply that formula. Right. So, but yeah, so there's a certain group of people who day in, day out, journalists are required to speak to push the narrative, right? So, and these are
expert opinion, official news, official
Yeah.
sources. So
yeah.
like what Manny's talking about is if you're going to cover something on this subject, you talk to one government person, maybe one academic person,
Yeah.
maybe one business owner.
Get kind of credibility from the different
Yeah.
sectors, private, public, then maybe like public meaning government, and then maybe
But it's only
somebody-
the people who are investing into the story going on, right?
Mhm.
Being pushed.
Well, not necessarily. I mean, like, so hegemonic ideas, these ruling class ideas can come through in many different ways. And so, I mean, like, taking, again, like, I don't know how in-depth we want to go.
Or
It's okay. I'm here to learn
I am
something.
absorbing.
Let's make it
Yeah.
more because it's
Okay,
it's
yeah.
easier if it's more concrete.
And this is
Okay.
good for me, too, like, being able to talk about this. Like, it
Yeah.
helps me.
It's like
Right.
reviewing
So
for the
let's
test.
give an example
right.
like this. So when the military buildup to Guam was first announced, right? The PDN put out a series of articles talking about it.
Mm-hmm.
And so they wanted to give two sides of the issue, people that were excited about it and thought it was going to be good for the island, and then others who were providing more caution, right? That they weren't. So this was 2005, 2006.
Yep.
And so they interviewed somebody from the Chamber of Commerce. They interviewed somebody who owns a bar. They interviewed somebody from the government, and then they got one person on the street.
And these people are handpicked.
Or no, I mean, so it depends. Sometimes they'll tell you who to interview, but it gives this impression that there's this organic conversation in the community. But in
Okay.
truth, the article that comes out basically makes it seem like you got a bar owner who says this is going to be great. You've got the Chamber of Commerce person who says this is going to be awesome for the economy. And then you've got this one person on the street who says they better respect our culture. And so it makes it seem like you should totally be for the buildup because all of the positives are on this side.
Yeah.
And there's just one guy on the street who doesn't like it, but he doesn't have a reasoned, rational argument. He just says they better respect
or a
us.
credible news
Yeah.
media.
or he's just
You
not
guys-
informed, or just doesn't know
Exactly.
anything about it.
And
It's
you
just
guys are already using the word. You guys said credibility.
Right.
Well, who gets to determine who has credibility?
For sure.
Yeah,
That's something
so-
I struggled with when I first started doing
Yeah.
this podcast is like, how do I gain credibility for people to be like, yeah, sure, I'll come on. And it took some time, and to be on a mass scale, I'm literally a blip, but to control like masses,
Yeah.
right? It's a whole different story.
Yeah, so I'm on the other side of my critique. I mean, here I am critiquing mainstream media, journalists, and the like. On the other hand, I'm also looking at digital media, things that we're doing, and that I think this is important. What you're doing is important. We have different perspectives on things, but that's all great. It's the fact that we're doing this is awesome because traditional media, is confined to a limited group of people who have the resources to start up newspapers, who can start up a TV station or buy a radio frequency, and start their own radio station. But with digital media, there is the potential for people like us to start up our own platforms and, reach hundreds, thousands of people out there.
Right.
So, yeah.
And so that's basically what your dissertation's gonna be
More or
aimed
less.
towards.
More or less, yeah. But it's specifically looking at how Chamorro activists utilize digital media in order to reach their audiences,
Using traditional thought in a newer medium
In a way,
to express yourself.
So
Yeah.
think about one of the things that you saw the viral video with Nathan Phillips, the Native American guy.
Mhm.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
So
Right.
With
the girl who shot the first video then went viral. She's Chamorro.
Right.
She went to GW, and so Kaya Taitano, and so that's something that Manny could feature sort of in his dissertation
Right.
as one of the things where he wants to talk about. For example, this was at the center of this controversy. It's between sort of. There's this debate in the United States, right? A political debate, Trump, anti-Trump,
Right.
Native American, white, and so on. And then there's a girl from Guam right in the middle of it, right?
Yeah.
And so she's conscious. She wants to put Guam's message out there. She wants to try to use the moment to talk to people about Guam and talk to people about Chamorro issues, stuff like Latexan, stuff like the Chamorro Land Trust. And what she finds is that a lot of the media she's talking to silence her when she tries to talk about that, or they ignore her because where she comes from doesn't matter. You know, the video gets caught in the national.
Oh,
politics.
you're talking about people that's been interviewing her.
Oh yeah, yeah.
To
the media,
on
that
the
talks
mainstream
to her.
media. Okay, okay.
And so this is what one of the things that Manny is talking about, right? Is that media operates on certain filters.
Right.
So when you're doing a story, you could write about anything, but you're probably not going to write about 99% of it. You're going to follow it in this logical pattern.
Well, today
you're
you're shooting for clicks, right?
Yeah.
You're gonna write the thing that people are reacting to.
Yeah, that is an evolution that's taking place in the newsroom.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah. And so for Kai, what she finds is that Guam is too complicating. That if she's being interviewed by somebody who's even more progressive, right? And she says, "Oh, can we talk a little bit about where I come from?" They're just like, "No, it's gonna complicate the story."
Right.
You know, you just talk about the action there that happened there, your experience there, but don't bring in where you come from because it'll make things too complicated.
Yeah, it's more like you got to give it in jabs or bite-sized pieces,
Yeah.
and the story can only be told, so you don't have 3 days to tell this story. You have attention span of the average person of 30 seconds or how fast do you swipe to the next
that's definitely
story.
You're trying to
right?
catch
So-
attention.
Yeah.
But the question I was gonna have, and maybe you've kind of researched this a little bit, is so you have the cultural or the activists or the Chamorro activists who are using social media to push their agenda or to talk about whatever it is they want to talk about in that situation. Do they do some of the I don't know what the word you used, but what you're studying, do they use some of those models to push their own agenda in the same way that the mainstream media is pushing it? That you know what I mean? Are they taking that formula and
Well, if it's malleable, right? I mean, you can sort of
have you
use it if you want.
Yeah, so that's the kind of the thing.
Especially
'Cause
if
it
it's
works.
proven
It works,
effective.
right?
Yeah,
It works. So
So the propaganda model, I think, really its application is for being able to dissect existing things. But I mean, I guess if you wanted to, in a way, you could probably look at it and try and structure your own media infrastructure, right? If you wanted to do so, if you were trying to figure out how to be I don't know, a totally subversive whatever. But the thing is, you would still have to have the capital to do that.
Right.
No, you could. There's cheaper ways. There's cheaper ways because if you take that model, then you understand that it is a system, but ultimately it's filled with people who make choices. And if you can make their choices easier, then they may sort of promote what you put, right? So, for example, a lot of journalists, they just rewrite press releases or they just respond. If there's a press release that somebody puts out and it's got something that finishes their story, then they're going to grab it, right?
Yep.
So if you know that your average journalist is overworked and underpaid and you can give them something which will sort of fit into their story, then they may take it. And one of the things that's interesting about journalists is that they tend to be more liberal, but the institutions they work for tend to be more conservative. So if you can acknowledge,
Because it still has that filter.
or because they're they respond to your journalist doesn't respond to advertisers.
I see.
The newspaper does, right? So if
So you can go to bring a piece and then they'll be like, "Nah, Manny, we can't run this."
Yeah, that happens on a daily.
Quite often.
It happens a lot. So.
yeah, because
But now we live in an age where you can take the stuff that you're getting rejected and put it on your own website,
Absolutely.
right? Own magazine, little pamphlets that you throw out on the floor or, in the post office or whatever it may be.
Yeah. But
What?
I think we thought of doing that once or twice. just
Nice.
throw.
Throw shit on the floor?
Yeah, so someone will see it. Someone will pick it up, and marketing, I guess,
Worked, I guess.
I mean, it seemed, you're just looking on the floor. It's like, oh, there is.
Yeah, I mean, you brought up the whole Native American and the Trump stuff or the kid and the girl who recorded it, and you think that that's independent media, and it was just thrown into the middle of a media war between the left and the right, and who's controlling the story and where the story's coming from. And when you when you saw her angle, it was kind of like automatic, right? And 4 things perfectly fit into that thing: white kid, Trump hat, Native American, Lincoln Memorial, and racism, the undertone. When you saw the picture, the first frame of the video, you're like, oh damn, that looks bad.
Yeah.
And then you see the 2-hour video of the Black Hebrew Israelites. I don't know if you guys saw that.
Yeah, I caught a bit of that.
They're taking claim for the whole ruckus and why the kids started going. And they were actually throwing like really bad jabs at these kids who were just watching them, right?
Yeah.
I was gonna say, are we talking about the incident that like just happened maybe about a week ago?
Over the weekend.
I don't know if people listening will like. I'm not sure if they all, but it's the one where the Native American's banging his drum in front of the Make America Great Again.
Yeah.
Okay.
And it's very tricky when we're absorbing so much media at one time. You know.
Yeah.
And it becomes tricky to dissect, I guess.
Yeah.
Right. And you would think that propaganda model to dissect media has to like completely evolve, because now a whole third channel. Now it's not just one control of media. Yeah. Now you have social media influencers where they have like millions of followers, and it's just one person, and all they got to do is be at a rally or be at a meeting. Right.
But those are people who can also be bought out. You know, like if you're making your money from YouTube advertisements and shit, like
then right after that they're like, support this drink. I always drink this when I'm thirsty.
Or I always get my lumut at this backyard. Check this lady out. Come Christmas time.
We can actually in the muddle and the mess of that story, though, we can see part of sort of how to analyze media, what Manny is talking about, right? Because it's interesting, because one of the things that media tends to do is they tend to reduce an issue to 2 sides, right?
Yes.
So there's the Democrats and there's the Republicans, there's the liberals and the conservatives, right? And so it's fascinating, because when you look at how it's evolved now, the media seems to, because at first the Native American guy, most media put him out there. He is a clear victim here. The boys were acting in racist, disrespectful ways to him. And then the other video comes out, and then suddenly the media keeps trying to say that the boys were victims now.
Yeah.
And it's
they're trying to criminalize the guy, the Native American guy, saying he was actually a vet.
The problem with that, though, is that if you take sort of everything that we know about it, the kids were still kind of fucked up.
Yeah.
The kids were still kind of fucked up. Like
there's new video too of before the
you know what you're doing, right? At that age, you know exactly.
Yeah, when you don the MAGA hat, you already know what that stands for. Right. You know, like
it's representation
with pop culture and all that stuff.
Yeah, and I've heard references of it being what the KKK hood.
I had a feeling you were gonna say.
Meant back in the 30s and 40s.
Right.
So one thing that the media, one thing that it does by dividing things into 2 sides is that it makes it hard for you to find out what might be the problem, or what might be, or if there's any real truth, right?
Right.
Because you want the media to report truth. We assume it reports truth. The media reports news, which is stuff that happens, and then they arrange it in a certain way so that it's like a drama. It's not really truth. Because the truth would almost certainly tell you, sort of like if there's Democrats and Republicans fighting over something, it would almost certainly tell you if one side was kind of tripping and the other side wasn't. But instead, they balance it out and say both sides are kind of the same here. They both take their shots. They both do the same things. But it's kind of like, actually in a lot of situations, one side you could argue is doing a lot worse, has more blame than the other. And so what does it do when the media tries to balance everything out? I mean, you look at this issue with the government funding and the federal shutdown and the wall, right? Trump says he's got to make a stand because he's got to get this wall built because of the migrant caravans that are flooding across the border, that are 1,000 miles away and will be here 8 months from now or something like that. But the media portrays it like it's this battle that's equal between these two sides, right? But you forget that Trump and the Republicans had control of the government for 2 years.
Yeah.
They could have easily gotten a wall through at that time. So then why is it then that they're portraying like this is equal now that Trump is saying we need the wall or never, no government, no full government unless I get the wall.
And now that the Democrats are in power.
Yeah, and so that's part of the problem there is it's not really two sides being equal. It's more like if you look at what they're both arguing, one side says let's start the government and then we can talk about the wall, but making clear that they don't like the wall. And one side says, no, give us the wall and then we can start the government. It's kind of like you're there to govern. One side is more ready than the other to govern. And so the media will portray it as being two sides that are equal. But in truth, there's one side that says, I'm not going to govern until I get what I want. And the other side is saying, we're ready to govern. And so if you think about it, this is the government. This is not high school cliques going at each other. This is not sort of West Side Story. This is not a Hula and Hineti or Kipua and Matapang. They're supposed to govern. So, but the media, instead of kind of giving us analysis which will help us understand the root of the problem, will instead portray it like a drama,
to keep people watching more.
That's one of the main reasons.
Reason why I want to turn on the TV tomorrow. Or the reason why I'm going to go to this website in 30 minutes.
Yeah.
Because now I'm getting live updates by the minute of how things are progressing during some certain event.
Yeah. Have you watched, there's that movie with Jake Gyllenhaal about the news camera guy. Nightcrawler.
Oh, never.
Oh.
Yeah. No? Okay. Well, there's a line in there. He says, if it bleeds, it leads. And that's a popular phrase in the news industry, right? So it's the idea that like the more grotesque, the more outlandish, the more it sells. So everything like it becomes a drama. Sells more papers.
How does that affect you being within Guam's mainstream? We have our own sort of mainstream media.
Yeah.
But and you dabble in independent media,
right?
Where it's more freely speaking and more free thought than working. I don't know. I'm not trying to jeopardize anything.
No, he's quit. He quit PDN. Not there anymore.
Yeah. So, it's good. I've worked for.
Go ahead.
I could say I worked for
the Kraken.
Oh shit. Yeah. No. So I worked for like one radio station. I've worked for both the Post and PDN. Right. So like, I've had quite a bit of experience with that. With being shut down as a reporter. There's certain angles. There's certain stories that you just can't cover. And there's certain stories that like I've submitted that but will never see the light of day, because of my perspective. So there is definitely there's an overarching agenda. And again, in my research, this comes through as like this idea that the status quo is that militarization is good, right. American colonialism is good. These are things that are unquestionable, and anything that attempts to question it is the other. And it's invalid.
For sure.
It's not.
Or they
credible.
don't cover. Or they're not interested to cover it and educate the
Does that run the same for opinion pieces?
Ooh, I think there's a again. I mean, this is the idea that
because you write an opinion piece, right? So it's
yeah. So one of the ruling ideas really, or the foundational ideas behind journalism, especially under like Western liberalism, is this idea that all ideas are equal, like as Miguel mentioned.
But that's not the case.
That's not the case. But like the idea of the marketplace of ideas, everything is equal, and you as a consumer decide what you want to pick up and pay attention to. But yeah, it's not the case. But I mean, like when it comes to like letters to the editor, opinion pieces, there are editors out there who will simply publish things even if they're overtly racist. They'll publish it because like, oh, these are people in our community that we have to give them a voice. Why?
Dave Davis.
Yeah. And people like Dave Davis are even like the other dude's name, the crazy
Paul Zerzan.
Paul Zerzan. These are guys who, Paul Zerzan later on, like, he did some crazy shit and he lost credibility with the media. But like before, they would just publish his pieces like that just because it was it was controversial. It was
what we just spoke about, the drama,
yes,
what is the
exactly.
guts, the gush.
Yeah, so he brings readership, like love it or hate it. So, but yeah, it's this idea that all ideas are equal. Like, let's publish these guys, these racists out here, because their ideas are just as equal to these people trying to defend acres of indigenous land that are untouched. So yeah.
It's funny because the media itself, Guam is a small media market,
Right.
and so that's one thing. That's one thing you have to sort of think about when you're analyzing stuff here versus stuff in the States, right? So the way that mainstream media on Guam works is a little bit different, because there's always much more access, right? If there's an anchor on a news show in the States, chances are good you'll never talk to them. I mean, maybe you could harass them on Twitter and they'll respond to your private message or something like that.
From their gated community in the hills.
But on Guam, you can people are more accessible just because it is a small island. But talking about sort of the issue of like my column, it's interesting. Because the PDN used to be the paper which kind of saw itself as being like the defender of Guam's status quo.
Okay.
Like the defender of Guam as an American territory. And so the PDN always used to see that they had this role, like that they gotta sort of talk about Guam as never living up to the United States. Guam as failing to live up to the standards of the United States. So the PDN for decades sort of played that role of being the voice of Americanization in Guam. And that's why, for example,
for
the community
who are here, or
for the community
okay,
here.
okay.
Because the media on Guam, interestingly enough,
prior to internet.
Oh yes, the media on Guam started off as primarily only being for the people on the bases. So the Pacific Daily News was the Guam Daily News, and it started off as the Navy News, the Guam Navy News.
Know that.
And so if you read the paper in the 50s and 60s, it's clear that it's actually for the people from the States on Guam. It's not meant for locals.
Right.
They would put in some local stuff talking about marriages in the 60s, and when Vietnam started, they started putting updates about soldiers that were leaving for basic training and stuff like that, getting deployed. But it was primarily, that's why if you look at the paper in the 60s, there's so little local news. It's all stateside news and international news. But the PDN changes because it has to respond to the market, because it's got to respond to the needs of the advertisers, the demands of the community as well. And so so that's why when Angel Santos and Nacion Chamorro were notorious, like the PDN used to black them out. It used to basically, like, if they sent press releases, the PDN wouldn't read them. If they tried to, they would never interview any members of Nacion Chamorro. They would cut them out, silence them, because they didn't see them as being legitimate voices on the island. But look at how things have changed.
Mm-hmm.
And part of it is because the way that we discuss certain ideas has changed. And going back to what Manny was talking about credibility, is that if somebody like me, who I may look like a homeless person who hangs out with Cheech and Chong, but
I was gonna say it adds credibility. I was thinking about that as you're talking. Like, I don't know what you're talking about. It actually helps. But just from one reader, one viewer.
But I do have a PhD. I'm a professor, and so that adds that level of credibility to it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so also the fact that more people that are professionals. Because if you think about who used to be the professionals and the experts on island, it was almost entirely statessiders.
Yep.
But now you've got Chamorros, you've got locals that are in the professional class, that are carrying that are doing great work for society. And so the media responds to that, and it allows those voices in. And as a result, the coverage has to change.
That makes sense, because back then you would only cater to the people who were literate and that can read. And now you have highly skilled workers that pay attention to what's going on in the government and society and the economy or whatever it may be.
Yeah.
and so the narrative changes.
And so what Manny experienced is like a switch, actually, when he was at the Post, was that the PDN used to be more conservative, and the Post, when it was the Variety, was very all over the place because they didn't really have a strong editor or publisher.
When it was the Variety. It seemed the stories were more widespread.
But then they switched.
More creative, or
a really weird shift just within the past 2 years or so, where like now the PDN, which Miguel just talked about as being like basically like super right wing, pro-military, pro-build-up, blah blah blah, all this shit. They were there on the right, and then you had the Marianas Variety, which they had to cater to a different class. They were up and coming, and they were a little bit more progressive. But in the past 2 years, it's been a total 180. Yeah. So like now you have like they're like super right wing, like the Post, that is.
Is that based off the editor, or who decides?
I think so. Yeah. A lot of things definitely. One of those is like leadership. So the editors that are there.
Burn those bridges. Burn those bridges.
Rooting you on.
Topple the laddie stone. Destroy the house. I'm just kidding. Yeah. Because you may need to work at some of those newspapers when you come back.
Maybe.
Or you can start your own.
I was gonna say.
Yeah. Well, I mean,
what I was gonna say. Start your own.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many possibilities, I mean, like before, like you would have independent publications try and start up, but they wouldn't last very long because the thing that's missing there is like still the capital, right? If you don't have the money to publish consistently, then you're gonna go out of business. You can't find the advertisers, but like there's so many possibilities. I mean, like it's still like we're at the tip of the iceberg.
I mean, crowdfunding too.
Crowdfunding,
things like Patreon and
absolutely,
where people who believe in you can directly support you.
To our patrons on Fanachu, Huguadzaham todos.
Yeah, honestly.
I was gonna say,
remember, sign up for your free lap dance as part of your perks and benefits.
I mean, there's a lot of ways you can go about creating your own publication. It doesn't have to necessarily be a paper. A piece of paper. I mean, you can go about creating a web page,
absolutely,
and that people go to all the time. Have some ads or whatever you.
I go to Dig all the time.
Yeah.
And they take from a variety of sites. But you have something that, like you said, I totally agree.
You could just go and you just create one app, create an app, make it an app, and so that you get notifications. Because that's I'm have all of the different medias, and that's the only way I get it.
He's a tech savvy guy.
Oh, I get it. It's like notification. This guy's in jail. This person.
Are you using like Smart News?
I'm just reading the local news, like PDN, KM, all of those ones.
Anything that pops up, right?
Yeah, pops up. It's okay. Is that
I feel like PDN notifies me of something like every hour.
Yeah.
And more news. Like what the hell?
Right. So I mean, consuming news. Just from like a common person or a person with a smartphone is not really paper. I don't feel like it is anymore. It's mostly pop-ups in your phone. But actually, the best news is WhatsApp, because I learn of like traffic jams way before it comes out on PDN. So I mean, that right there is a good example where you can take like an independent source or if you're trying to push your agendas, anybody that's not left or right wing, that's kind of like got both wings, I guess.
Oh my gosh, are you an anarchist too?
Huh? No, I don't. I have no idea. But so that's what I'm saying. It's like you could actually do that. You could be your own editor, and welcome other people to contribute, and it'd be like kind of like a community. Media or a community.
Yeah, but stuff like that can go completely awry real quick.
Isn't that the point? Right? I guess I don't know.
Yeah. Well, I mean, like you brought up a really
just don't allow message boards.
Yeah.
I mean, like, and in the PFG, in the publication I gave you in the last issue, there's a guy there who talked about media. It's not in there, but you can. Look it up. But there's a guy there who critiques mainstream media as well, and like. A lot of times it seems like, we hate the media, we hate mainstream media, we hate journalism, because people are so harsh on it in comm studies, right? But it's not the case at all. And this guy was talking about how, if anything, media should be owned and answerable to the people. Mm-hmm. So, like, if this was something that could be like socialized, or maybe like we talked about, crowdfunding is one issue, or is one way to go about that. So if journalists and publishers, if they were being resourced and financed by the people, and the people could determine what was important to them and how they felt about certain issues, if they could determine those things, then there would be more control over that, and it would be more relevant.
And mainstream media will be pretty much fucked.
Oh, I have a good idea for that. I'll tell you guys after the podcast.
Okay, shoot.
Yeah. So in all seriousness, I don't want somebody else to do it. And but yeah, I just thought of something, but I'll tell you guys after the podcast. It's something that I think that can happen, and where they kind of like figure out whether or not they want to, that's a credible, or that's a great story that is told. Like someone publishes, you write a story, you put it out, and everyone says that's not relevant or that's not any good, and nobody sees it because nobody wants, it's an app. But
then it goes back to credibility, like how do you make sure these people are credible in saying that your story sucks?
Right. Well,
or that it's true.
That's always up to the reader, It's always gonna be up to the reader about who's credible or not.
I guess so.
Mm-hmm.
Like Dr. B said, is like, you have a PhD, and that's what kind of gives you that credibility when you start talking about things that weren't talked about or spoken about back 10, 15 years ago. Nobody with a PhD wanted to talk about those issues, and now here comes you revolutionizing the whole way it works. All you need is to do some research, and kind of that's what in a way gives you that credibility to open up new platforms or open up new channels. And I think that's very great, by the way. I think it's awesome.
Oh, no. Hey, no, so Manny does everything for our podcast. Although not anymore because you're leaving.
I'm leaving,
But
it's portable, by the way.
He's going to keep
that's not an excuse, Dr.
jabbing
B.
it to you throughout the podcast.
No, that's not an excuse, by the way. We ran the podcast for miles apart. So, Manny, that's not an out. So I got you back.
You're still in there.
No, we have a really good team, man, behind the show now. So for the past couple months, we've been teaching some new volunteers how to run the show.
And I've seen these new hosts running the shows and stuff.
Yeah. So I'm pretty confident that it'll keep going. It'll survive long after I'm in New Zealand. So it's good.
Yeah. I hope that people see because one of the things that alternative media like this, it brings out is that, that people have the opportunity to sort of put their money behind something that can sort of give them ideas, help inform them, right?
Right.
And so it's interesting because we do that, right, with the drinks that we buy, with the food that we buy, the brands that we buy, the movies that we watch, right? So why not do it with media as well? Because in the past, media was supported by advertisements, right? And that's always and that's part of the problem with that type of media is that the journalists, the institutions, the TV channels, the newspapers are driven by what the advertisers want and what the advertisers will allow, not what their readers are asking for, right? But then as we see it now, we have the possibility, although it takes you got to make the infrastructure for it, right? You got to use stuff like Patreon and so on. You have to sign up members or get support directly from the people, but it makes it more democratic. It makes it more organic.
Right, like how public radio, right?
Yeah, it makes it it's a stronger conversation. It's a stronger conversation. And I'm hoping that here on Guam we'll keep pushing for it because I mean, if you think about it, even on your podcast, when you sit with somebody and you talk to them for an hour, you get deeper into a topic, whether it's with Pale Eric Forbes or whether it's a Chamorro who's been in the States, sort of in a major industry, you get deeper into stuff than 10 PDN articles ever could. And you're giving people sort of a type of content that they want, right? It's funny now because we say that people that our attention spans are shorter, but at the same time, there's a huge growing desire for deep dives. That people actually want a well-told, well-explained, sort of entertaining explanation for something in the world. Like that's what's really funny to me is that our attention spans are not necessarily getting shorter. They're getting shorter for certain types of things.
Right.
But for other types of things, we're actually wanting more. Like it's really funny because even like a young kid, like you look at a young kid who just wants to play Fortnite all day long, right? And there's this assumption that they really just want to watch unboxing videos and stuff like that. But at the same time, if you show them a video which explains something from history in 7 minutes, they'll actually like watch it, and they'll absorb it too, because it's changing the way that we receive information. And alternative media, homegrown media, indigenous and independent media can do that. It can provide sort of that other way of giving the information so that people can.
And now there's more of a choice. So when you want to invest yourself into a certain kind of media, you'll spend more than 5 minutes or 30 seconds on it, right?
Yeah, like think about podcasts. Like 30 years ago, would anyone have thought that podcasts would be popular?
Right.
Like that somebody's going to download an hour of a person talking?
Yeah. Can you imagine FDR doing the fireside chats?
Yeah.
Podcast?
It's so funny because people would have thought that that's really boring.
Right.
And what's really interesting is that like a downloadable podcast, it's still, even though people record with video for podcasts, it's still audio only.
Yeah.
So if you think about how we're supposed to be so visual and we want to watch images, but there's a huge desire for just listening to somebody talk about something interesting.
Right. Gary Vee brings it up all the time. He said, podcasts brings efficiency because you can learn. You know, people are fighting for time all the time.
Yeah.
So if I can learn and listen to something, conversation, or if it's a investigative piece, whatever kind of podcast it may be, I can drive and do that. I can clean and do that. You know, I can brush my teeth and do. I can do anything and listen to a podcast.
Mm-hmm.
And that's sort of, I guess, the way everything is evolving in that sense, right?
Yeah. I don't know, maybe since we're on the subject, I'll just bring this up to you. But I mean, like, you know, whereas like in the States, you know, people listen to podcasts and they're very popular because, you know, they can go on for hours, right? Mm-hmm. And, you know, this suits like driving time, like you're on the highways and stuff, right? Yeah. Like, what about for a Guam format? Should we be publishing like 20-minute episodes?
I think
like,
yeah.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, I was talking to someone else about that, but there's a little secret. You can keep it at 1 hour and double the speed up, and you'll soak it in.
But then in real life, you have to talk like this.
Well, you just talk regular. Yeah. You just talk like this, but if you speed up.
But that's how this guy listens.
That's how I listen.
Even audiobooks, right?
Yeah.
You listen to audiobooks like that.
You start at 1 speed, right? That's the normal speed. Then you go to, there's like 1.25.
1.25.
You start there, and then it gets a little. You know, you get used to it.
That's okay for you?
Yeah, I do 2 speed. I do 2 speed.
Shit.
Well, you just soak it.
He just doesn't listen to the is and.
Yeah, you just listen to the main point.
All the small words he doesn't listen to.
Yeah, it's real fast, and you just don't try and think about anything else. You just absorb it like a sponge.
Yeah.
And then afterwards, you'll have an idea. Yeah. Like you'll have one major idea out of everything we talked about tonight. Mm-hmm. You'll pull like 1 or 2 major points.
Agreed.
And then that's it. Like all the others. I mean, you know. We're having a great conversation, but really, you're gonna just pull 1 or 2 points that you liked yourself from the conversation we had at 2 speed, at 2 times the speed.
Gotcha.
But if you do normal speed, like let's say it's getting interesting, you go back to normal, and then you can kind of think while the conversation is going at normal pace. But if you're trying to absorb it at the 2 speed, you kind of just pull 1 or 2, and at one speed it might happen as well, but you kind of have that more time to like doze off into whatever conversation whatever topic we're talking about.
Yeah, I see long form conversational podcasts as being triggering, right? So it's always like you said, you're pulling out points, stuff that interests you. You're gonna hear a trigger word. It's like almost hearing your name, right? It's like, oh shit,
gotcha.
Like, oh, okay, hold on. Now I'm gonna pay attention. You know, you may not be. It's like eavesdropping. The only reason why you eavesdrop into a conversation is because you got triggered by a word or something they said.
Yeah.
I think shorter podcasts would be more specific, topic specific, trying to get your point across in 10, 15, 20 minutes, which I think it's perfect for drives for Guam.
Yeah.
You listen to an episode, especially you live in Inarahan and you drive to
anywhere.
Anywhere to work.
Yeah.
You know, that's 2 episodes a day. And I know of people who listen to this podcast and cut the podcast into pieces. Like I only listen to the podcast in the car. And it's when I get in, my Bluetooth automatically kicks in and it's the podcast, right? And so it's like it's piecewise in that sense.
Yeah.
But honestly, it's really up to you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's the great thing about this medium.
Yeah.
It's up to us.
Super flexible, man.
Yeah.
I mean, if we wanted this podcast to be 20 minutes, we can literally just make this 20 minutes. Be like, say what we need to say, and then, all right, thanks for coming over 20 minutes.
Complete like one idea, and then that, that's like one point. Complete one idea and you're done, and then move on to the next. I think it depends. I think it really depends on what your goal is, or what your culture or theme
is. The message you're trying to get across.
Yeah, exactly. So if you can do I think you can do a 20-minute podcast, but you're going to be throwing a lot of purposeful messages to the listener.
And ideas.
It's not, I don't know if you can do it. You can do a 20-minute conversation, but it's going to be, what you watch on the news. Like, hey, it's going to be more interview-ish if it's between people. It's not going to be like, hey, kind of like get you into a deeper train of thought. You're not going to hit the deepness. You can't get that deep within 20 minutes if you just kind of met that person. It's just the dynamics aren't there. So if you have kind of like a certain direction that you're going to go, I definitely think 20 minutes will be good. Or if you have a structure or somewhat of an agenda that you're trying to hit with the person and you let them know, hey, but it turns into news. It turns into a news kind of style. Which
on the Apple TV the Reuters app, when you log into their app
right away,
it asks you how much time do you have, and then it has 5, 15 and 30 minutes, or 10, 15, 30 minutes. And so depending on how much time you choose, they'll give you the same news, but just depending on how much time you have, they'll expand on it.
Yeah.
Right. It's like, okay, we'll talk about this a little in depth, right? But for like the 5 or 10 minute one, it's like it's only headlines. I feel like I'm headline reading it. Like, all right, and then it goes, you are now up to date. Come back when you want to be updated more. I'm like, sure.
That's what the 2-speed Master Random podcast feel like.
I think I have a title for a short form Guam podcast. I mean, for any of your listeners that want to take this, I mean, please feel free. But the title should be like, "But if anything." So like, at the end of each episode, it's like, "But if anything, bro, check me later, find out the rest." Yeah.
If anything, I'll be there.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's
say minus well.
It's interesting you bring up like lengths of podcasts, because it's something that I've been sort of dabbling with. It's like, I mean, we were talking about doing a 4-hour podcast with Arlene Steffi, and we're like, damn, was that too long?
Wow.
But we've done like 30-minute podcasts with somebody online, right? It's been, and so like Zach Banner or Trey Santos or something like that.
Zach,
and
they didn't have much time, but we pushed him a little more than 30 minutes. He only had 30, but the conversation gets good at about
30 minutes.
30 minutes.
You're just warming up, right?
Yeah,
that's good.
So it's like, I think that's the hardest part, is getting it started and getting it moving, and what kind of direction you kind of want to take the conversation. I think for this podcast, I kind of just don't go with it's pure interest. Like, I don't do this to try and get certain information. It's like, I'm interested in the shit that you've been doing, because that shit's interesting. Because I don't get to do it every day. We don't all get to live each other's lives every day. So we can sort of get a peek of how we're analyzing the world that we're living in, rather than what we're actually doing in the world every minute of the day. Like, we haven't even talked about what you did the last 24 hours, right? But we've talked about what you did in the last 2 years in a nutshell. And podcast, dude, fucking beautiful.
It's cool.
Yeah.
It is very cool. You should talk, Manny, you should talk about sort of Fanachu and some of the stuff we do on Fanachu.
I mean, there's so many things. I mean,
no, but I mean sort of the way that we've sort of created the different segments to it.
Oh, yeah.
How has it evolved for you guys? Because it's sort of agenda driven, right? There's a backing message to support independence for Guam.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So I mean, I don't know. Really, the podcast Fanachu, the goal is to try and educate or re-educate people, about its political status, about like Guam's history, And now we've branched off into like different segments. Like we do radical history segments, radical readings. So now we cover not just issues on Guam, but also issues in other American territories, and other colonies, as it were. So yeah, and
wow,
you're
creating
for patrons.
You're creating
patrons,
a parallel,
Plug
right?
the Patreon.
oh yeah,
We gotta plug
This is your
we
chance
gotta
to
plug the Patreon all the time.
yeah, patreon.com/Fanachu.
Every time you meet somebody for the first time, hey,
I know,
hafanigo.
I'm a terrible self.
Non-hosty magets, angin guides mo Patreon, por favor.
yeah.
If you've got a Patreon, follow Fanachu.
Yeah, those are things that we provide to our patrons,
Yeah.
you know, and so it's awesome that we've grown in the past like 6 months or so, and these are people who like pay for our content, you know, just as we were talking about, like people who appreciate what we're doing,
For
and
sure.
you know, but yeah, so really the idea behind the podcast is just to try and educate people, you know, things that you wouldn't normally read about or hear about in mainstream media.
Yeah, and it's interesting because it's always going to evolve, right? I mean, the last couple years have been quite I wouldn't say like a full evolution, but it's been moving. There has been some
fun.
traction.
Absolutely.
And you guys even went over to the United Nations at one point in the last year, I want to say.
Yeah. So we went
October 2017.
and then just this past year we
And
sent
some people went
representatives as well.
Okay.
So yeah.
But so one of the cool things about Fanachu is because, you know, we at first it was just an audio podcast, and then we
Right.
started to kind of live stream it.
Mm-hmm.
And we found that, you know, it was fun because then people comment on it. There's an interaction with it. But then we thought, how can we sustain this? You know, Manny found Patreon, and we're kind of like, well, what can we offer people, you know, to get them to sign up for it? And so we're kind of like, well, what we have is information.
Mm-hmm.
What we have is sort of knowledge about history, culture, and so on. So what we started doing is offering all these special segments, right? So you can watch the live stream for free, but you can get access if you sign up as a Hugwa member, a second tier person. You can get access to the secret Guam history podcast,
And
or
what
the
does that
radical
entail?
history
What-
Guam.
Is there a secret history to Guam?
Well, yeah. If you sign up on Patreon.
This is
So-
your chance to share it.
So I'll give you an
Everyone
example.
is-
So I'll give you an example.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
every week when we record our live stream, afterwards we record the two other segments, the radical readings and the radical history, or the secret Guam history podcast. And so but you only patrons get to watch those. But so for the secret history one, I tell a story which you're guaranteed not to kind of read in any Guam history books. And some of them, you know, so some of them are ones where the people who've told me those stories, they don't even want me to reveal who they are until after they've died, because because some of them. So I'll share one. I'll share one.
Yeah.
So for example, this
Piqued
was
my interest.
so this was a couple weeks ago. I met with an older Chamorro guy, and he told me a story about how in the late 40s, him and a bunch of his friends, you know, they got into their uncle's Jeep and they drove down to Tumon Bay. Now, by that time, the military had taken Tumon Bay. And so there was a very small area where locals could swim and fish, and everything else was only for military. And so the MPs would patrol the area, making sure no locals were swimming down there, or no locals were down there. But these guys, they went down there, they didn't see any MPs, so all these Chamorro boys jumped in the water and started swimming all over. After a while, MPs, they drove up and they started whistling and yelling for the guys to get out of the water. And so all of these Chamorro guys, they're all in their teens. They all came out and they lined them up, and the Marines were calling for a paddy wagon to take them away. And so they all these guys, they had shorts on, they all put their hands in their pockets, they had their head down like this, and they started talking to each other in Chamorro. And so at first, they were kind of like, oh, Lanya Magatsa, we're in so much trouble, you know, they're gonna take us, they're gonna siempre mapresu, they're gonna put us in jail. And then eventually one of them said, hey Lanya Prim, ti makompreprendi hit. They don't understand what we're saying. And then one of them was like, hey, Meganya hit Kinusio, there's more of us than them, we could take them. And so there's 3 Marine MPs that are there, and it's maybe about 9 or 10 Chamorro teens. And so they start to make a plan speaking Chamorro, but the whole time they're looking sad and they're pretending to cry, so the Marines don't suspect anything. And so eventually one of them says, okay, esti planuta, so tsuli I inainai gi betsatmu, take the sand in your pockets, and when I say go, throw it in their faces, we knock them out, and then we run. And so then one of them said, Sigi! And then they all got their sand, they all threw it in their faces, and they punched them, beat them down, and then jumped in their Jeep and ran away.
Yeah.
That sounds very, very Chamorro, actually.
And so one of the reasons why the guy says that I can't, like, he doesn't want that story to be, he doesn't want his name or anyone else's name revealed, is because some of those people went on to be elected into office.
Oh.
So some of them are from very prominent families. And so they, yeah, anyway.
So what years were these?
Well, I don't think those are in the, was that the 40s?
The late 40s. So yeah, some of them were elected to very high office, some of those boys. But so those types of histories, because in my research I've talked to a lot of people, and a lot of people have shared stories with me, and then sometimes they share stories where they feel like maybe it's not appropriate, but for me it's kind of interesting because it tells that other side of history, right? So some of the stories we talk about, like the Chamorro, the Chamorro soldier in the Spanish military who assassinated the Spanish governor in 1884, or the story of the Chamorro in the Chamorro Spanish Wars who worked as a double agent and betrayed the Spanish and killed more than a dozen soldiers. And so these are all cool, interesting stories that you know, that try to give us another
Didn't make
idea.
the media-controlled publishing company.
Yeah, that
Right.
that complicate things. Some of them they show Chamorros fighting back against the system. So a lot of the ones that I've shared with are stories of Chamorros that were in the U.S. military and faced discrimination, and how and a lot of them, especially in the 60s and 70s, resorted to violence in order to try to sort of defend themselves. So like one of my favorite stories is when I told as part of this podcast is about these Chamorro guys and Hawaiian guys who were stationed in Okinawa, and they, what's it called? There was this big, tall, white guy who worked with them, and he would always make fun of the Chamorro guys, and he would always say racist things to them until one day he made a racist comment about this one Chamorro guy's wife, and referring to her as like a whore and stuff like that. And that Chamorro guy snapped, and he said, "The moment you step foot off the base, you're dead." And then the white guys are like, whatever, because all these white guys are like tall, and all these Chamorros and Hawaiians are small. And so the moment those guys left base that day, the Chamorros and Hawaiians were waiting for them, and they beat the shit out of them. And the next day, the Chamorro guy who told me this story, he was expecting that he was going to get court-martialed, fired. He went into work, and he told his wife, Saguao dispensa, siempre ma court-martialed zopago. He's like, we need to get ready because I'm probably going to get court-martialed today. Maybe you can go stay with your sister or something like that. And so went in there, and then immediately, as soon as word gets around, because all of the white guys showed up, and they were all black and blue and messed up. And so this one guy, so the boss comes up, and he's like, and he calls everyone to get, this was in a machine shop. He calls everyone to get into the floor, and he basically says, "I understand there's a problem here. What is the problem?" And so they kind of explain the situation and stuff like that. And so the Chamorro guy who is the ringleader, he says basically, "This guy said something terrible about my wife, and I will beat him up again if he says it again, if he says anything like that again." Basically. And so then it's funny then, because then the boss basically says, "You know what?" He looks to the white guys. He's white too. He says, "You know what? I think we have a problem. The army must be doing something wrong if a bunch of small guys like that can beat up some big guys like you." And everyone laughs, and then he says, "You know what? I don't know what they feed you guys in that island of yours, but maybe we need to talk to you guys about how to improve our readiness."
Is that how the Guam National Guard got started, or?
They're like, we need to put a National Guard there.
But so these are
Shout
so
out to those guys.
I like the podcast because I get to tell stories like that. I mean, sometimes I write about those in my column, but then it's like in the PDN or in other forms. But in a podcast, you could tell a story like over 30 minutes.
Yeah. What do you
put detail into it?
How do you
voices?
How do you receive the feedback that people give you on your opinion pieces? Because I know it's probably not always good, right? Not always bad either, but it's just interesting, because
it is.
You write something, it's based off of a reflection of something that you've written, right, yourself.
True.
And for someone to judge you over the internet based off what they've read without ever probably never meeting you, maybe seeing you from afar, like there's that Dr. Bevacqua guy.
I mean, to be honest, I'm kind of used to it by now. So I always tell people that I've had one person who sends me like like something mean every single day, and he's been doing it for 14 years now.
With some dedication.
And so sometimes Manny gets messages from him too.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so but he has been so we used to fight on message boards when message boards were a thing. And then he used to email me messed up stuff, and now he sends me messed up stuff on Facebook.
Yeah, you can block him, right?
I know, but for me, there's a, what's it called? For me, there's a saying that if you wait by the river long enough, you will see your enemy's body float by. And so I believe strongly in that idea because some of the people who have been very antagonistic to me in the past, eventually a lot of them actually apologize, or they come closer to my side later. And so I always keep that, for some people, I keep that open. So that's why, I remember there was one guy who always used to fight with me in the past online in message boards and stuff like that. This was, more than 10 years ago. And then 5 years later, he emails me and he's like, I know we used to not get along, but I see the work that you're doing sort of as a scholar, and would you mind helping me with a research paper I'm doing? And in my mind, I was kind of like, this is it, Naina. This is what victory tastes like.
Licking the sword.
This is good. And of course, I was like, yeah, I'm going to help you because I don't want to destroy you. That's a very Western and Eastern way, right, of seeing the world. That's why when the Spanish came and they fought Chamorros, they were looking to kill and to punish and to hurt. But Chamorros fought wars for show, to prove you were better. That's why the Spanish wrote down that when Chamorros would fight against each other, clan versus village, the moment one or two people were down and bleeding, they would stop. And they would judge who had won based on who performed the best, who acted the bravest, rather than keep fighting, because if a bunch of you die, no one wins. Even if a bunch of your enemies die.
Wait, so you mean there's no real warfare here on the island?
It was more ritualistic warfare in ancient times. For many indigenous people, it was like that, because if you're, especially small communities, even your enemies, you don't want them dead. You just want to prove you're better than them, because no one wins if a bunch of people die.
Right.
So that's why
But what about maybe the Manatang coming in from the valleys trying to take the coastal lands, right?
There may have been some stories like that. There may have been some stories like that. We don't know.
It's kind of funny. I was gonna say sad to say, and it shouldn't be going on, but there was a bunch of viral videos going around with kids fighting, or even back when the MMA thing was getting big and people were fighting, and just that same mentality is still alive, where you see kids or people they're gonna fight each other, and it's really, that's what they're doing, is exactly what you said, and they're not trying to kill each other or anything like that, but once someone gets one good punching. The guy's
Brim,
like,
Brim
"Are
is
you
good,
good? Are you good? Are you good? Is that Are you had enough?
You want some more?
They're not trying to. They hit them down, and then you just see him stand, waiting for the guy to get up. When you look at Western or the other videos that kind of go viral on YouTube in America, these guys are down and they're like wailing on the guy and they're yelling at him, standing on top of him, yelling at him like disrespectfully, and the guy is knocked out cold, could probably be dead. But here, and when we see the kids go at it or adults even, it's just wham once and they stand back like, "Are you good?" And if the guy doesn't reply, like he gets his shirt and he's off to, because he's not trying to
Goes
kill
to the
him.
cooler.
That's true.
Yeah,
And
and
so-
it's interesting that was
Gotta
there.
finish up the christening, bro.
It's unfortunate. I mean, yeah. Like, that's it. I gotta go now. I mean, I gotta go home and go to church. It's a weird kind of thing, but it's still going on today. It's sad that that's happening in the schools in the past, but yeah, I just noticed that it said that, so I just want to point that out.
It's kind of like, for me, if you love Guam,
Yep.
then even if you disagree with me on something, then like if you love Guam, then you're a human being to me. We often think that if we disagree with somebody, then they're not human, right? You can say whatever you want about them. They're on the other side of an issue. But what I find for a lot of times is that even if you're on the opposite side of me on this issue, I bet that there's a way that I could move you closer to my side on another issue.
Right.
So that's that's why when I talk about things, I'm always trying to kind of find a way. How can I get you to open up your mind a little bit about, and I don't want to defeat you in a debate, but I want to just kind of get you to open your eyes a little bit more, and I want you to find your own way closer to where I'm at. And you don't have to come all the way to my side. Like, it's not about that, but it is like I have, so it's like there's some things that I think are important, and I just want you to kind of see them, and as I said, find your own way to the truth, but search for the truth.
Yeah.
Well,
There's a common ground there.
I was just gonna say it's a compromise too, right? Almost like a agree to disagree at some point.
Yeah, that's right.
In some factions.
So, like a couple of weeks ago, it was funny because last semester, a group of students who were doing a research paper on statehood, they came to visit me at UOG and they were like, can you tell us what's good about statehood? And in my mind, I was like, well, you should know that I am not in favor of statehood at all, but I can give you good arguments for it, because at the end of the day, I want you to learn and think.
For sure.
So, but I'm going to also tell you downsides to it as I see it, but I'm not going to withhold good arguments for why statehood might be the best from your perspective.
Yeah, there's this dude at the university that I went to. He would travel universities throughout the nation, and he was a religious scholar, and he would literally stand, I don't know, I feel like I've talked to you about this before, but he's a religious scholar, and he would stand in the middle of where everybody's crossing, and he will have his microphone with the little speaker, and he just starts talking. And there'll be every religion trying to shut him down or his thought, but he makes it clear he's not there to debate with you. Like, if you don't agree with me, let's see where we do agree at, and see how we can sort of see where our thoughts intertwine with each other. And that's what like impressed me the most about him, where you're standing there for like 45 minutes in the sun. You're like, I'm going to listen to this guy. I may not agree with everything that he says, but it makes sense.
It's like me and Manny were talking about this earlier today. If you take that position, you make your side larger. You make it feel bigger. If you are somebody who is arguing really aggressively, you make your side seem small. You make your side seem desperate. But if you take that position sort of an openness to it, it actually makes your side appear larger than the other side, even if you, and you may not realize it immediately. Because if you take kind of that larger position at first, it'll seem like the other side is winning. But all you got to do is kind of let the other side go for a while, and then they'll run out of gas. They'll run out of steam and then, the fight is whoever's the last one standing. It's not whoever punches the fastest for a short period of time.
Right. That's very true. I never really thought of
And so, but that's why, because on the issue of political status, independence, what I find is that somebody who may resist it at first, they don't have a deep resistance to it. They're just responding.
But there is an agreement that something needs to change, though.
Yes.
Right. It might not be in one particular way, but everyone can agree, like, all right, there's some injustices going on for sure, on the level where we're literally not being paid attention to, and we have someone sitting in the place where things are being decided, and they might as well be sitting in a glass box, right?
Very true.
Absolutely.
Oh,
Hey, you want to go ahead?
Jump in. I can keep
Oh yeah,
talking.
no. I guess I'll jump on that. But I mean, like, I guess that's going back to media. That's one of the things that really frustrates me. Is we talked about how, like, the foundation of media, mainstream media, is that all ideas are equal. That's why there is it's important to take both sides, everything, and leave it up for the consumer to debate that, right? But with something like colonization, it should be pretty plain and simple, like the debate should not be about whether colonization is good or colonization is bad. Like, there's already
obviously it's bad.
It's obvious, and there's
that's where we get the common.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. There's already an international consensus that says colonization is bad, colonization is racist, and there's in the 60s they began a push to decolonize most of the world. And, so the fact that mainstream media on Guam continues to portray the issue of colonization as whether or not it's good or bad for us is really
whether it's a question at all.
Right. It's a question at all. Obviously, something needs to change, just like you said.
Right.
Yeah. We were talking about it, and I think I'm kind of one of those people have this viewpoint, or this is just my viewpoint of. You're right. Maybe about 5 years ago, we were always talking about, like, is it good? Is it bad? Should we just stay the status quo? Because, everything's easier when it's just status quo. But you have certain things that happen where it kind of pushes you in a corner to start thinking, status quo isn't really the best way to go.
There was a point where the conversation almost didn't even exist.
Yeah.
Where it rarely came up in conversation.
Right. Yeah. Right. And it's like you're just not, I don't know if it's brainwashed or whatever, but it's, life is good here the way it is now, and it's never ever going to be different. So why shake the cake?
And it goes back to mainstream media, right? I mean, the way we have been consuming media, right. We've been conditioned to accept that this is the way media is in a certain respect.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I was also gonna elaborate on that a bit. Is where we know something, we know it needs to be changed, or we know there is a question, or well, what is it, right? What are we gonna do, or where will we be sitting 20 years from now? But the point I'm trying to make or want to say is, our island, or this is just my opinion, we don't necessarily have one voice as a group where it's going to determine what we want to go forward and say, hey, we want whatever it is, independence or free association or statehood. There is no there's not enough participation right now at this point. I feel like we need a little bit more of the people who are just not paying attention to any of it. To get in there and just, even if whether it's for statehood or for or anything, but like nobody,
it's to actually care, though.
Yeah, to care, exactly.
Right.
To care, to get educated about the topic, or to, even if they're not educated about it, just to at least be like, hey,
absolutely, man.
That's going on right now. Not just buying spam at the store, or and gonna go eat and sleep and then wake up the next day and do it all again.
But what's the best way of spreading information, right? Is it do you go with more traditional? Do you send out canvas teams out there and put things under people's windshields and hang them on the doors, or
that sometimes ground zero is,
or go to like a grocery store and stop people as they're walking by, which is a lot utilized today, even for environmental causes, right? But when does it become ineffective?
Well, I think that the federal shutdown right now is gonna really wake up a little some of the people here, the local people here, because there's a lot of federal programs that are gonna get we're seeing it strapped. The Section 8 or the welfare is gonna they're gonna get strapped if they don't figure something out. Like people are gonna say, oh, it's okay, I'll just ration my or go stay at my uncle's house.
I think they're giving food stamps away out early for February, right?
Yeah.
But then let's say it goes on for like a little longer, then I think only when they're pushed to a certain corner we're going to be like, wait a minute, so if the US just says no, then we're not going to get this. Is that how this works? Because all I did was go to the office, sign the paper, and like they told me I'm going to get my stuff, my assistance. But now it's like, oh, is this how it works? It's I don't like the U.S.
Like an awakening.
Yeah. It's like, and I don't want to say it, but
you've been sleeping on dependence.
It's kind of, it might be like a blessing in disguise for not just that particular federal program, but any federal program that people are they don't know how it works. They just go, and there's a lot of people that say, oh, I don't know how it works. I just sign and I get whatever it is I get, any of the federal assistance.
Yeah.
And they don't realize that it's federal, it's not Gov Guam, and that it can end like without their say or in it. Nobody in Congress or in the Senate. So
no, that's a good point.
Fantastic.
It's important that we remember that, because we've gotten benefits from our connection to the United States. We definitely we continue to, right? But we shouldn't mistake what we get. Right. That's the thing and we shouldn't mistake how we get it. And so it's funny because if you asked your average person on Guam which government is more reliable, Gov Guam or the federal government, almost overwhelmingly everyone would say the federal government, right? How many times has Gov Guam shut down in the past 2 years?
Right.
0.
And then, but the federal government it's like they're doing the new Star Wars trilogy or something like that. Shut down number 1, the Phantom Menace. Shut down number 2, the Attack of the Clones. I don't know, but and so it's funny because our perception of what we get from the United States or how the United States relates to us is so different than what it really is, right? And so it's not about hating the United States, but it is about understanding. I mean, I always give the example of if you, what's it called? Actually, if we want to kickstart the decolonization movement, we should pay Kylie Jenner to post on Instagram about it.
Oh, really?
yeah.
It's $250,000. I think that's how much it costs.
Or the egg Instagram account.
But let's say,
or whoever's the most popular. Do we know who the most popular Instagram
it's the
person
egg.
on Guam?
Oh, that's
on
the most.
Guam?
Oh, on Guam. Oh,
have them post.
I was gonna
it.
say
Is
the
it
most.
Crowns? I don't know.
The most liked picture is the egg.
But in terms of us in Guam and the United States, I always say that. So here, us on Guam, we can imagine that the United States is like the way that I imagine, let's say, Scarlett Johansson. And so I may really like Scarlett Johansson. And I may have a fantasy in my head that Scarlett Johansson really likes me.
Yeah.
And I may think that if I'm like sitting and watching her in the Avengers movie and I'm talking about her, then she could totally feel what I'm saying.
The vibes are there.
And I can say that when she gives an interview and when she winks, she's winking at me.
Yeah.
I
really
can
feel it.
And I can even make crazy moves. Like I can say Scarlett Johansson lives in New York or LA and I'm going to move there. I'm going to change my life based on where she's at because I think we have a future together. I think we have something strong.
We touch the same tablet.
But I think you're crazy.
When she vacationed here.
But it's crazy, right?
I think that's
and
crazy.
so the problem is that's oftentimes the way we on Guam think about our relationship to the United States is that we do a lot of wishing and hoping and dreaming on this side and they don't give a shit or they don't know anything about us on the other side. I was talking to a bunch of cockfighters about that. And I was trying to get them to understand that you got to think about political status. If you want to get cockfighting legalized on Guam again, you can't. You got to think about that because I said the cockfighting, so the Farm Bill, which repealed the exemption for the territories for cockfighting, was 209,000 words long.
How many pages?
And the part about the territories was only 184 words.
Wow.
And it doesn't even put the word Guam. The word Guam doesn't even appear in that section. Neither does Puerto Rico. They weren't thinking about territories. They didn't care about the
They
territories.
didn't know the list, what to list. They just
Yeah.
put, yeah,
How many territories do we have again?
territories.
Just says
So just
let's
put
get rid of
territories.
it in them because
184 words. That's like 3 paragraphs.
and so that's the thing is when you look at that
No.
when you it was a third of a page.
Yeah.
It was a third of it wasn't even a full page. And so when you think about it, that's so, and I tried to tell like these cockfighters, I was like, something that is important to you, that is part of your culture, part of your livelihood. The United States got rid of it without giving you an entire page and without even
No research.
naming the
nothing.
island
Yeah.
that you come from.
Yep.
And I said, so think about that. So let's not pretend that we have this like a warm and loving relationship with the United States. Sometimes we benefit, but a lot of times,
Volatile.
yeah, a lot of times there's disrespect, there's ignorance.
I mean,
Well, it goes right back. Sorry.
it goes back to what you were just saying. You know what I mean? When things start happening and you start losing certain things, people will start waking up in certain respects. Yeah.
Yeah, it's just like they'll hopefully. I mean, I didn't mean to, I just wanted to make it clear. I wasn't pinpointing Section 8 or those welfare. That's just what's hot right now. Another thing that's hot is the H-2B stoppage from workers from Manila. And, you know, they didn't do any studies on Guam that a lot of them come from the Philippines. It's really, a lot of it's probably because they speak English rather, you know, that's I think their second language, and then you have Chinese, Korean. That's the close. You know, those are the closest, most kind of easiest places to get workers. But Koreans, Chinese, do they speak good English? They only can probably work real well for like the Chinese companies, the Korean companies. Like they'll have no problem finding labor over there. But when you have all these local companies that kind of or American companies that here doing work, they speak English. Most of it's English. So that was a major it's hot right now. And for us to not even have been in that conversation of hey, well, you know, a lot of people come from there, this is the reason why, and you're including us with the rest of the mainland where the problem is, then you know we don't got any say, and it all trickles down to status.
True.
It
Mangi
really
si
does.
Miguel, Mangi si Mike San Nicolas. Nice.
Yeah,
He should be all over that. I expect a heartfelt 1-page long Facebook post about that.
Sponsored.
But
I like this
Just-
guy.
just because I mean I hate to say it, because Chris Barnett had that piece where he was criticizing Mangi si Miguel. How can you reach him because he doesn't have an office open yet on island, right? He doesn't have a temporary office up, and he says he won't have an office on Guam until March. And it's unfortunate because we already don't have much representation in Washington, D.C. But then there's clearly these issues on Guam, but he's not talking about them. He's not speaking to the people. He's got to be he's they call Guam the tip of the spear. He's the tip of Guam's spear.
Yeah.
In terms
literal.
of the federal government, yeah.
Yeah.
But so
everything, any laws, anything that comes straight from,
from
your political
Congress.
stylist.
yeah. And so that's the thing is you're so right though that they make these decisions and they don't think about how Guam is affected because Guam is a footnote
Right.
to the United States, and they think about their 50 states, and that's it. And then if something they decide affects us, I mean that's why Robert Underwood's told me once, the first time I interviewed him about his job in D.C., he said that the role of the non-voting delegate is to remind the United States that it has colonies, that it's got colonies, and that it can either make their lives better or it can make their lives worse, but it's got to remember that it controls their fate.
I mean, but you can remain vocal and still see some sort of small change, right? And maybe that was the problem with the last delegate. I don't know. I didn't see much speeches on CNET or C-SPAN, C-SPAN. I don't know.
Yeah.
But it's, I don't know. I think I lost my train of thought. I feel like we've absorbed so much information at this point.
I feel like this past couple of years, especially since the military build-up's been kind of announced and that they made that decision to come here, and we now are important. I mean, a little bit more important than we were, or seemingly. They give us a little scrap here and there, just to kind of like not kind of make us outcry too much. So it's like, okay. So the HGB, we're sorry. Here, you can have it back. And they were like, okay, it's fine and dandy now. We won't really complain as much because we're gonna go back to the status quo. And I feel like that's kind of that notion that they're kind of doing, which is the federal government, meaning the federal government. And it's kind of interesting that you brought that up, the whole status quo. But I feel like that's kind of what they do. That's what it seems like. The cockfighting, they'll probably go make some noise about it, and they'll be like, oh, okay, so we'll just give you guys at least oops, sorry, we'll white it out, and or we'll take that page out, and you guys can have your cockfighting back, and now half the island is happy. Or there's a lot of people cockfight.
I don't cockfight.
So there's a lot. It's a lot, man. We're just not there yet. In our lives, but I'm pretty sure we'll.
I've driven by the dome, and they're like, "Go away, don't. We're closed. Even the parking lot's closed."
So I don't know. I think it seems that way, and they'll give it back to us a little, and we'll kind of go and go hang out and play with their toys and be fine little kids.
But what is the argument though,
about.
right? Is it economics? Does it help the island economically? Is it more of a culturally driven, fight for tradition, something that was brought here possibly by the Spanish, I'm assuming?
Well, it's
maybe the Philippines.
It's interesting because there is one account that says that Chamorros fought birds before the Spanish came in. But there was no roosters, so they fought pigeons instead.
Okay.
And so I've never found anybody who fights pigeons before. I mean, you see pigeons being jackasses to each other.
This is a joke, but I don't. Were they fighting the pigeons themselves, or were the pigeons fighting? I was just trying to lighten the mood up, guys.
Also, no, Chamorros. I mean, from what the account, it's just a paragraph. It's because it was just by a crew that was just passing through, and they wrote down a couple different things that they saw. And that they observed. And so one of them was that Chamorros kept pigeons in cages, and that they would train them and they would have them fight somehow against each other. So, but that's why, and I've been telling people that because it was introduced via the Spanish, but at the same time, you could also argue that when the Filipino soldiers brought in their roosters, Chamorros had their pigeons and were like,
game changer.
Ooh, that's...
Is that the iPhone XR?
I know. It's like, hey, Par, let's upgrade. It's the latest Manila model. But yeah, totally. The Godzu X. I got the Godzu 7. But but it's all of those things though. And that's the. And I mean, for me personally, like there hasn't been cockfighting in my family in a while, but and it was funny because even when I came out, supporting cockfighting or being against the ban of cockfighting, right? There's some people who didn't like it because they said it's animal cruelty and so on. And for me and for independent Guahan, the issue always is that the federal government shouldn't have the right to ban cockfighting.
Well,
we can have a conversation locally.
It's not the thing in particular. It's the principle behind what has happened.
Because we can have a conversation locally, and if we find that cockfighting is really damaging to our culture, or that the gambling, the drugs, those are the big major things that are hurting us, then we can ban it. Because if the legislature chose to ban it or the governor, then they're going to have to deal with the people.
Right.
But if the federal government does it, we can't all fly to Washington, D.C. Yeah. I mean, were we going to have a Periscope protest or something like that? Or just say,
well, for every 100,000 Chamorros out there, you get another 100,000 Chamorros out there.
You get 1,000 people in one spot, and then you get them with a phone, and then you say,
and WhatsApp has
President
four-way
Trump
call now.
We've got 1,000 people angry here, far away.
Listen to their screams.
But that's why I think one reason why the PDN is changing is because I think they're realizing that the status issue isn't going to go away. It's going to become more and more of an issue.
But are they would media here on Guam try to focus more on local media or world media? Because it seems like we get lost in the consumption of world not media but world news, right? Whether anything's happening in the United States, I feel like it'll overtake anything that's going on here that would mean something to the masses.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
That's true.
Yeah. So if we did have a mainstream media institution that truly represented the people of Guam, then that wouldn't be the issue, right?
Yeah.
But I mean, like, I think there's one of the other things that frustrates me about mainstream media as a journalist is the fact that there's already so much room for them to talk about colonization.
Mm.
Instead of saying, oh, this contractor got a $2 or like an $8 million contract for the buildup, talk about how that country or that a construction company is California based, and all the money's going there. The only impact it'll have on Guam economically is the fact that they'll probably hire some workers, and that's the end of that story. But those millions of dollars that we were being promised is not going to us. Like, there's a lot of room for them to talk about things from that angle.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's one of the things. That's Denancio, Manny. That's one of the things that the media has to kind of grapple with, is that the media often feels like they have to represent the United States in Guam.
Yeah.
That they have to talk about what America is, and that's why the PDN for the longest time always did that, talking about how Guam wasn't good enough and not measuring up to the standards.
Well, they're under USA Today too, right? So
PDN is under
it's
USA.
sort of they're sort of like that more
Mm-hmm.
upper control. It's like, oh, what are these guys doing out here? Right? It's like you better talk to their editor, see what's up. What's up with this news thing?
Yeah, they've actually been we talked about how like the PDN and the Post sort of shift roles, right? I mean, like, they've sort of been more like progressive liberal, like in certain circumstances, and like I've published a few pieces. They ran them called as Beyond Liberation. So I ran a couple pieces like that, talking about like the controversial aspects of World War II. And these are things that directly pointed to, they put a big finger towards colonization, and they ran it. So like, I kind of wonder, like, how much could you get away with at the PDN, like publishing critical news?
I think because the issue of federal contractors, right? The issue of the buildup, if the PDN, because when you break down the buildup, right? It has never been the golden ticket that people thought it was. Because, I mean, I remember people from the Chamber of Commerce in Gita saying Guam is going to get $8 billion. But that's not true. That's the price tag for the buildup. And what's part of that is spent by
oh man,
Zanya, he's against the buildup. But part of it, first of all, it gets spent behind the fences, and it goes to contractors from Japan and the United States. They get that, and then very little of the money comes to Guam. So how does it benefit? And it's funny because even some contracting companies on island, who tend to be pro buildup, what they realize is that when the contracts come out, they get the smallest pieces. They get subcontracted because all of the big pots go to the friends in the Pentagon. Go to the big companies that have established relationships with the military, and then maybe they will throw a couple bones down to the people here. And so for the PDN and for the business community, they may imagine that the buildup is great for them, but a lot of that is also pretending that you're in a great relationship with Scarlett Johansson, is because it's not really benefiting you. Because, and it's funny because sometimes if you talk to a contractor, they will see that truth, that there is some benefit, but it's never as large as you think it is. And other times they just kind of blindly say, the buildup is good for Guam, but the buildup is only good for certain people on Guam. Right?
And a certain period.
Oh, yeah. And then I always like to, whenever I talk to people about the buildup, I'm always like, if you own apartments, then the buildup is probably going to be good for you, because that's when, if you own an extra house, if you have something to rent, if you've got something to invest, then you can benefit from the buildup. If you don't, then the buildup is going to squeeze you. I mean, I saw it in where I stay, where suddenly there was this news that the buildup was going to happen. They were starting construction, and all these landlords started to raise their rates suddenly, like hundreds of dollars, to get rid of the locals so that they could bring in the military, who have the overseas housing allowance. And so for them, it's good. For those people that have resources, that have extra, an extra house, that have an apartment, a condo or something. And so for them, they could legitimately say, I support the buildup because I have a way to benefit. But for the average person, they may not benefit from it.
Do you think they understand, though? The
other question is, are they mentally prepared or doing anything to mentally prepare for that? Mentally meaning positioning themselves to take advantage of it, because that same person at that same breath might just be waiting for a handout or whatever, and they're not positioning themselves to go and educate themselves to
be ready
bidders,
for change?
to bid on contracts that will be awarded to anybody who can meet the requirements of the bid. What I'm saying is, like, let's say you're just an average person, you have some savings, and you have to take some risk in order to take advantage of the buildup. What I mean is, are they seeking out resources to figure out how they can take advantage of the buildup? Because there's free resources out there that will help you become a small business, get some credibility, and then partner up with a bigger contractor. Even though you're a sub, you'll still be participating in that. And what I mean is, like, are there people out there that want to do it and they don't know how and they don't know where to go? Or is it they're just listening to all this build up kind of hype and they're like, when am I going to get my handout? Or when am I going to get part of the $8 billion? You got to kind of take steps to,
like, empty consumption.
Yeah, you got to take steps to get your business license, or to think of an idea like, what would the buildup need that I can kind of like provide a service for, and go that route if they want to.
Yeah, and sorry to cut
was
you
it.
off.
No,
Just going
Thank
off
you
of
for-
that.
that's
Like,
good.
how do you,
Someone needs to do it once in a while.
but you can also position yourself outside of the buildup.
Yes.
You can see the changes that are happening societally here and economically here. Guam, we live in a huge niche market, right? You can, if you want to do it, chances are you can do it and make a living off of it.
Yeah.
But it's all about, like, how much are you willing to do
Yes.
every day without someone being like, hey, you need to come to work from 8 to 5.
Yeah.
All right.
You got to work
Because
for it.
most of the time, when I wake up on a Saturday or Sunday, I'm like, oh, I'm not doing anything today. And how many people do that 7 days a week
Yes.
without even realizing they're doing it?
Yeah.
Right.
So you're talking about, like, an access to, like, the resources, right? And like how many people can capitalize on these things?
It's there.
It's there, but I mean, like, I think very few people can actually do those things, like you said, man. I mean, like, people are working 7 days a week, probably 2 to 3 jobs, trying to pay rent and shit, but like, what I was thinking about as you guys were talking was, like, sure, like, the buildup may be good for certain people, for property owners, right? But I mean, like, at an individual level, like, that may be good for you. But I mean, societally,
right.
Like, the condition of the hospital may not get any better.
Yep.
And, societally.
Tourism definitely ain't helping out that situation.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, I think still up to now, Dr. Fred Schumann said 60% of revenue from tourism leaves the island.
Yeah.
Before it even dips back into our economy.
Because we don't tax them.
Yeah. So I mean, like, there's individuality, individual benefits versus, like, the collective good, which is what our people have always been about, right? It's like, what's good for the collective.
But what is good, right?
Going back, so
But like, we keep diving deeper and deeper and deeper into
Like I said, you can't do this with a 20-minute podcast.
Right. Yeah.
that's
There's the
true.
benefits.
Going back to sort of the media, though, so what would the role of the media be in this situation? Because a lot of times the media acts like, sort of, by supporting the buildup, by being for it, we're helping the buildup, because it's the assumption that if the buildup happens, it's just good in general, right? But the media really should be breaking down some of the stuff that we're talking about. The media really should be bringing it to people. If there's opportunities, how can we maximize those opportunities? If there's problems, what are these problems, and is there any way that we can stop them, mitigate them, solve them? But instead, the media a lot of times feels like its role is to support it because this is our connection to the United States. Is we're patriotic, we support the military, we're the tip of the spear.
Yeah.
And so that's why for me, the more that the media breaks away from that, because the funny thing is that even for a lot of the business owners, I mean, many of the business owners, the more people on the island, the more money they can potentially make. So as long as there's more people, there's more money to be made. But in their own way, though, because I always say, every time I've talked to like a Rotary Club or something like that, where a lot of the people there have, they've got means, they've got resources, I always tell them, you should be in favor of changing the island's political status, because if the U.S. builds up in a territory versus a foreign country, it's a very different equation.
Yeah.
In a foreign country, you get a piece of the pie.
Yeah.
You sign a treaty and you can, because why is Japan paying for part of the U.S. transfer to Guam? It's because they get to direct it to the companies that they want, their own construction companies. So Japan is like, they're going to pay more than half of the cost for the buildup, but it's okay because it goes to these major construction companies in Japan. So the money stays in their economy.
Come back into their economy, right?
And so, but the thing is that Guam is not at the table. Guam doesn't get to basically say, we want these jobs to go to locals. Can't do that. Can't say anything like that. In other countries, you can do that. You can basically say security on your base is going to be local. You can say that the janitorial service has to be hired locally.
Or you can actually rent the land that the base is
That's
on, Camp Lemonnier in Djibouti, right?
No, that's true.
I think it's Djibouti, but that's I think the U.S. pays about $16 billion a year,
And so so that's why
to have that base.
Yeah.
And
we have a situation here.
confirm that for me, Matt. Thanks.
But we always want to be looking to the future, because the situation we have now is not the best.
Right.
We benefit, but what we benefit, we kind of get indirect benefits. We get crumbs in a lot of ways. It's kind of like you get the shish kebab money that soldiers spend when they leave the base, which is something, but it's not what you could be getting considering how much money comes into Guam from the federal government.
Yeah. Nice.
And so that's why, but that's part of that conversation, that decolonization conversation. You want to be putting it out there, and the media plays an important role in whether people think that decolonization is something we should all be thinking about, or something that only crazy people think about.
And the way, and maybe the way that the
Scarlett
media is
Johansson.
portraying it, right, is
Oh man,
That-
when Zakus is scarred.
is that the person reading the media story isn't in the actual conversation. So it's super open to interpretation at that point, whether they understand it, what they're reading or not. Could be just 4 columns on a page and just went right over their head. Like, oh, that was a good headline.
Yeah.
Shit, I don't remember anything I just read.
For me, it's kind of the scarier part, or the more unknown part about the whole independent or not having a U.S. backed country, being Guam being their own country, or even free association, is when crisis hits in terms of natural disaster. We're right up the alley, and how that all would play out in surviving those things. Like,
Can
you
we
guys,
use the CNMI as an
you
example?
guys are old enough to be
Oh.
have lived through it, right? So through like Paka or Pong Sangwa, or it was just God.
Oh yeah.
It was crazy, and I haven't been to Saipan. Has anyone been to Saipan, or any of the other NMIs? Yeah, so it's. I heard it's just crazy out there, and at that time, if the country is supposed to sustain itself to recover on its own, right? An independent country would do that. If we were that, and we just couldn't, we didn't find the means of revenue yet to generate like an emergency fund. Is that what a normal family would do, right? You have an emergency fund and you save that for times like that. Do we just ask, the world again, hey, can you help us? And what obligation do they have of helping us? And that leaves the other part where we have to make good with all the we now become our own marketing in terms of how do I say this? We have to go to each country,
creating
relations to each country, and say, hey, why would you want, why would you want to be in not cahoots, but how would you want to be tied with us? Because right now the U.S. already is kind of does that already, kind of for Guam is whoever the U.S. is. Well, it gets double-sided, right? Whoever is friends with the U.S. and enemies of the U.S. is with Guam. So, but we'll have to go and forge our own independent relationships with each of the leaders of the countries, and then figure out how, in times of need, they will help us. And man, how about in times of their need? We will have to react to that way. So I just wanted to bring that up.
I mean, forming relationships with other countries is definitely not.
I think Guam would be good at that.
I mean, that's not a bad option.
It's not
right?
bad. Yeah.
It's I think the main point, and I think the common misconception about decolonization or self-determination is anti-military, anti-military, anti-U.S.
Doesn't have to be.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be. I think the U.S. is not shy about international relations, as we're seeing with Venezuela, right, backing a coup. But I mean, like, I don't know if there is any country out there without some tie to the U.S. And I don't think that we'd be in those circumstances, given our position. The only thing that would change is we would probably make more money off of that by renting out lands for bases. We would probably have a better say over what lands can be used for military activity, when they can train in our oceans, when they can blow up dolphin heads and shit, and with sonar, whatever the fuck they do, But yeah, so I don't think we would be in those circumstances necessarily, especially. I think Guam has a lot to offer, as we're seeing with like the telecommunications industry, right? Like we have all these fucking cables.
I mean, all the cables run. We connect the east to the west, pretty much, and north to south of us, right?
Yeah, man. So I mean, I don't know. Those are things that are sort of exciting to me.
And they got the spaceport.
It's funny,
coming up.
That's right. Yeah.
Have you watched the show Designated Survivor?
No.
So any of you watched it?
No.
Got Kiefer Sutherland as So I only watched one episode of it because actually the new chief of staff for Luleon Grow, he's the one that told me I got to watch it because it has a Guam mention in it.
Oh, cool.
So I think it's the last episode of it. It has a Guam mention. So what happens is that there's America has another fictional territory, and the people there have a vote to become independent from the United States. Wow. And so the president sends people down there to try to talk them out of it because there's military importance to this island territory, and
sort of the narrative that's
so very similar. We can hear the similarities here, and one of the president's guys says something like, oh man, if we lose this island, next we lose Guam and American Samoa, and we're watching the end of the American empire. And so but what happens though is that as the government and this island is pushing for independence, they get hit by a storm, a tsunami.
Wow, okay.
And so then the United States, though, it can't, the U.S. Congress refuses to give them money because they want to become independent.
Right.
But the president says, I'm going to use my emergency powers to have the military deployed to give them. I'm going to say that there's riots in the streets and looting, so I can deploy the military to give them aid. And then after he does that, then the leaders of the island say, as soon as we get power back and everything goes back to normal, we're going to request to be a territory of the United States again. It is an insane sort of proposition, but it's
but probable too.
Yeah, it very, very could happen.
But yeah, you can download it. It's interesting.
What is it called?
Designated Survivor.
Okay.
But Spencer too. But one of the things that we have to think about is that Puerto Rico is a very important territory for the United States, and Puerto Rico got treated like crap after they had their hurricane last year.
Yeah, and you had support sitting outside their ports trying to give aid, but because of the Jones Act. Yeah. I mean,
so yeah, and then
that actually
just the fact that they tried to lower the death count, that the death count was thousands, and they tried to kind of pretend that it was just like a couple dozen.
Yeah.
And then Mike St. Nicholas was just there. I'm sure he can tell us all on his next very exciting and
I can tell you guys are big fans.
Post. But the problem though is that if you're a territory, you can't expect to be treated with respect. Like that's the thing, is that territory is all about you get whatever treatment they want to give you because you belong to them.
Right.
It's like
And-
a kid, being a kid.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or kind of more like being a slave or a kidnapped victim.
Yeah.
Because a kid, you're supposed to
Kid
treat.
slave, then.
Yeah,
There you go.
and so that's why
Child labor.
Yes.
as a territory, you're always kind of, they can treat you really well 1 second and they can treat you like crap the next second, and it's part of the same system because it's, and I always say that people from 49 states may hate people who come from Alabama. You could have all 49 states hating Alabama, but Alabama still gets treated with a level of respect because it's part of the 50, even if everyone can't stand it, for example. As a territory, you're not entitled to be treated with respect. You belong to the United States, and and that's why part of the reason why you want to change the status is because we've been talking about federal programs, federal aid. The United States can always cut off aid as a territory. I mean, there's been talk for years about reducing food stamps, and they've been reducing food stamps every year to Guam. And the thing is, you can't complain about it because as a territory, you get what we give you. You don't, as the Obama administration and the Trump administration, as they have both argued, you live in a territory, you receive privileges from the United States. Student loans for college students, those are privileges. Section 8, privilege. Food stamps, privilege. Everything, having a government, privilege. None of those things are rights because you live in a territory. And so it's this weird thing that we don't always notice, but it's underneath it all. And when something like the cockfighting ban happens, or when something like the H2B thing happens, then a lot more people realize it. But we would wish that the media would engage with that rather than trying to tell people it's okay because we're an American territory, to remind them that this is because we are a territory. And that if we don't want this to happen again, we should push for becoming a state, becoming independent, becoming freely associated, something where we've got a defined relationship.
What would be the most seamless process? I mean, of course, there's no. Okay, I know. I guess I know what you guys are gonna say. You know what I mean? But it's
cumbersome.
because there's always gonna be dealing with problems, right? I mean, with the dependency on government, the current dependency, right? So how do you support all that going into a certain political status? Why haven't we thought about going free association the way the Philippines went before they started the clock for their independence, right?
It's a great idea.
Sort of taking a page out of their book and seeing what freedoms and what things we can handle on our own, with still getting government support or some kind of backing. I feel like there's no direct route. I feel like there's like there has to be a step-by-step process for us to understand as people who live here, Chamorros, Guamanians, of what is really possible. Because we can be our leaders of independent Guam can be treated, brought to China, dined and wined, given all the nice luxuries and royalties, being treated like royalty, and they'll be like, okay, we want to build a utilities plant there and power all your stuff. Don't worry, just pay us back until we can, right? And then we owe money to a place, and now we're in debt to play in a place, we're in a different kind of handcuff, right?
It's true. That's why one of the reasons why I feel like independence is, and not just independence, but just this conversation is important, is because in Guam we kind of don't take the governing of our island seriously enough. That a lot of times we just kind of, your average person or your average leader feels like Uncle Sam's gonna always take care of us, and it's not if you live on an island where a typhoon hits and your port is closed for a week, it's The Walking Dead by week 2.
Right.
If food's not coming in, oh my goodness, imagine what happened if there's no internet on the island. Oh my goodness, you would have roving street gangs of kids who'd be like, I can't play Fortnite. I can't play Fortnite. I'm going to fuck up somebody. I don't know why kids have old people, old Chamorro. I can't play my Fortnite, boy. I'm sorry. Then I was going to fuck.
Because it's also old guys.
I was going to fuck out that cocksucker potgun, but I can't because there's no internet now. But so you think about that, and it's kind of like our relationship to the United States, it gives us a cushion. But in a way, it keeps us from taking care of some things that we need to do, right?
For sure.
And so I like talking about this, and I like promoting these ideas because no matter what status, but independence most of all, it gets us thinking about how we can take better care of this island.
Right.
Pushing the corner, kind of.
Yeah.
Forced to figure it out. I was telling someone just today, I think, was if Guam had independence, like right now we have no idea how that's gonna go, but I feel like as independence or free association, whatever we determine or whatever is determined, Guam will kind of figure it out. They're resilient enough to survive and just to kind of figure it out. I don't think it'll be a too big of a deal in a way where I think we'll figure it out, eventually figure it out, come together, figure it out. But I think the part is like,
a bad analogy just keeps coming into my head. So you eventually figure out how to wipe your ass, right?
yeah,
you don't always get it right every time you do it.
Yeah, you don't get it right on the first shot.
Yeah, you just got to try again. And it's bad. I mean, but it was just like boiling in my head. I had to share it.
And so much of it is just feeling pride, and then turning the pride into action, right? Because that's the thing is, I remember the late Sus Leon Guerrero, who helped start the Bank of Guam. I interviewed him a couple years before he died, and we were on totally different sides of the issue. I was more for independence. He was very much for statehood, and so we talked about it a little bit, and he said, "But you know what, boy? More than anything, what we Chamorros need to do is we need to be proud of what we've accomplished." And we can't let people take it away from us, because from his perspective, he says, look at what happened. The United States kept us in chains before World War II. They didn't let us grow our economy. After the war, there was the security clearance still until the 60s, couldn't grow our economy. The island was destroyed in World War II. We went from being farmers to senators to business people. And he said, we deserve credit. And he was talking about his generation.
Like celebrate the successes.
He was talking about his generation. He's like, the United States gave us things and told us to copy them, and we did our best. And considering what we came from and what we dealt with, we did pretty good.
That's an interesting point.
And the thing is that, and if we stop trying to imagine that we got to measure up to the United States, then we can see that we actually have a lot. And we've actually got talented people. Mm-hmm. We've got smart people. We've got great ideas. But there's always this specter that we're supposed to measure up to the United States. It's like, no, forget it. Let's do something that works for us. And if it works on both, that's good. But let's think about something that works for us. I mean, we're an island on the edge of Asia. We're the hub for Micronesia. We're a couple of hours away from all of the capitals of Asia. We could be the next Singapore.
Yeah, you said it, hub.
We could do that, but we could never do that as a territory of the United States.
Right.
But with more freedom, we could absolutely do that. Now, I'm sure we would fuck up. I'm sure we would make some mistakes. And it'll all depend on how well we can learn. We learn the lessons of those who came before. We learn the lessons of other places that went down paths that we don't want to. So when you're talking about like China, oh my goodness, China's got they're
taking over
subprime loans.
The Pacific parts of the Pacific,
the world.
Pacific Africa.
They call it subtle warfare.
Yeah. China's turning the world into.
You don't need to shed blood no more to
Las Vegas
to
10 years ago.
Yeah.
When a lot of Chamorros lost their houses because they signed up for those subprime loans, and so we'd have to know, and we'd have to think this may look like a sweet deal, but we've learned the lessons that others have before, and so we know not to shake that hand. We know that if we're going to deal with China, let's get a different deal, or let's even refuse. Let's pass on this deal if we can see the strings attached to it, and so but that means trusting in ourselves. Like believing that we can do it, and then once we're at that point, taking great care with the choices that we make.
Word.
For sure.
And so, but we can do it. Whenever somebody, it's funny because some of the people that resist independence the most are older Chamorros.
Yeah.
And then I always tell them, I'm like, but I sat down with people from the World War II generation. I interviewed them when they were older, looking back on their lives. I talked to them about their stories. And I say, I think that generation could totally have been independent. I think that they could have run an independent Guahan just fine. And I think that we can still learn the strength that they had, the intelligence that they had, sort of the will that they had to survive the war, to rebuild the island, to put up with a lot of crap and shit thrown at them from the United States, but to still create a better island for the next generation. I'm inspired by that generation, and that generation's strength can still be with us, but we got to find it, that greatest generation. And so whenever I meet an older Chamorro who says, I say, but think about your parents. I say, think about somebody like B.J. Berdallo, F.B. Leon Guerrero, Pedro Martinez. Think about Dick Titano, Tony Wampat. Even think about Paul Calvo, Joe Ada. Think about all of these guys who helped build the island we have today. And they made some mistakes. It's not perfect, but they did a lot. And we can learn even more. And then I always love that conversation because they're saying, you're right, we could do it. And I always say, but we have to adapt. So what was it that they did to feed their families, to sustain the village, to keep things together? How can we do that but in a modern world?
Right.
So how can we reduce our import dependency? How can we take it so that we feel more ownership over our schools, over our village, over our parks, our beauty, our beautiful island?
Right.
How can we make it so our economy is more locally focused so that the money stops leaving? And so we can learn the lessons that we can learn from them, but we just have to adapt it to today.
Yeah, and people have to understand that we live in the greatest time in the history of all of Guam. Just because you can do whatever you want. You can, if you want to do it, you can.
It's true.
And technology and the internet
podcast.
Technology and the internet can definitely allow you to do so and make your reach more widespread than just here, and have people who live out in the States still support what you're doing here. I mean, I think that attribute any successful maybe local brand can attribute that a lot of their consumers possibly come from the States because there's sort of that longing to keep ties to Guam, but no one wants to deal with the bullshit, right?
That is true. Actually,
that is
wait.
true,
So,
yeah.
what are your demographics? Most of our listeners and patrons are in the States.
Yeah.
Most of my listeners come from here,
Okay.
but I get a good amount from the States too, mostly West Coast.
Wow.
Yeah,
Cool.
but I can understand your demographics because it's like, that longing, that tying. You have to really want to listen to someone that on this show.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not really topic specific, mainly just based off the person who's coming on the show, right? So
Nice. Cool.
I feel like we can go on and on about this.
Yeah. I was gonna say something.
There was a point. I do want to bring this because I did put on my Instagram. If you want to ask a question, you can.
Mm-hmm.
And so Terrence Diego asks, any projections on what our ports can make in revenue if the Jones Act was removed as a result of being independent?
That's hard to say.
It is hard to say.
You want to is that what it?
Yeah.
To quantify, that's difficult because.
You want to come closer?
Sorry, I want to say. I mean, I'm no expert economist or anything, but I would say to ask for a certain number or something, you would have to go and see what's coming in already. But then if we go and produce our own farm, our own products here, then we may not be seeing a lot of imports. So then it's kind of hard to determine.
But the repeal of the Jones Act doesn't have to be a result of independence, right?
Right. No.
That's true. Although it would be hard to get the Jones Act repealed as a territory.
John
Have to have
McCain
an
has
exclusion
failed.
or something.
Because
he's the only one that fought for it.
Because
fought against it.
Yeah.
Because the funny thing is, when I went to D.C. and asked somebody in Congress about that, they said the reason why Guam could, like somebody said, why do you think that Guam could never get a repeal of the Jones Act or an exemption of the Jones Act, a full exemption? And I was like, is it because of Puerto Rico? And the person who worked in Congress was like, no, it's because of Hawaii. Because if Guam got one, then Hawaii would definitely ask for one.
Right.
And they would argue that there's a precedent set by Guam getting it. And then what you would probably have is all of the states on the West Coast
Everybody
ask
else.
for it too.
Yeah.
And out here, the Jones Act just really hurts us. But in the States, in different ports, it's supported by unions. It's supported by dock workers and stuff who, and so that's where we're choked by the U.S. interests, by the U.S. politics, right? But if we were to be independent, or with less federal restrictions, Guam could be a transoceanic shipping hub. Because stuff that's Guam can be a major shipping lane. It already is in some ways.
Yeah.
But because and so it could be.
It's all good. He does that.
And so.
Hey.
But estimates do show that there would be a significant,
He's had enough.
a significant decrease in prices.
He wants the Jones Act to be repealed also.
So some say that prices could go down by a fourth. So that, if you're paying $4 for something, it will be $3. Others say that it could go down as much as half, just if we were allowed to deal directly with Asia.
So it's not necessarily ports revenue. It's more trading.
Well,
across the board.
So that would be something too. Is that if Guam had more of that freedom and we had the capital, then you could redo the port to basically make it a major hub.
Have you had some food over there, Steve? Yeah.
A major hub. I was talking to that's it is a possibility, but you can't do those sorts of things as a territory. You would need to have more economic freedom. That's why, when it's funny because I never would have thought that somebody like former Governor Joe Ada, that he would be in favor of independence growing up. But the last time that I met with him, he was like, boy, I think that independence may be the best for Guam because we would have control over our economic drivers. Mm-hmm. And because statehood offers things too, but statehood doesn't offer you full control over your economic drivers, because your economic drivers are caught in the policies of the United States, right? So you may want your minimum wage to be a little bit lower, but there's this minimum wage, it's got to match whatever the federal government says, right? Or you may want to make your labor laws a little bit different, but you got to do it with you may want to make your, and so on and so on. But that was the thinking at that time, when he was governor, and the time before, was that Guam had tried to create different industries, but federal regulations choked it. Like in the 70s, in the 60s and the 70s, there was garment industry on Guam. There was an attempt to start a watch factory on Guam. People were trying to create manufacturing here, but it simply couldn't survive.
Too expensive to export out.
And then U.S. regulations interfered, and then U.S. interests too. Like it's a weird sort of game, because
thanks, Matt.
Tickets every time. In the past, every time some other carrier would come in and offer cheap flights from Guam to the U.S., Continental in the past, and then United would kind of complain about it, and then suddenly those cheaper tickets would disappear, because ultimately the U.S. will protect its corporate interests, right? And so when foreign airlines would come in and offer alternatives that would save us here on Guam money, a U.S. company just has to talk to their senators in Texas, talk to their representatives, and then just say, hey, we're going to lose out money because these Koreans or these Chinese or these Japanese are moving in on our market. And then suddenly the FAA shuts something down, or the State Department moves. And that's what's oftentimes happened in the past. And so that was a little bit off the question, though. But it is part of sort of the larger issue about why you may want to have more local control over those sorts of things.
Yeah. I wish there was more questions. That's the only one that came in.
Look at my beard.
Overwhelming amount of questions.
Yeah.
No, I think we really touched on a whole bunch of different, really great topics that I wish we can like continue to expand on. But let's save it for another conversation, another podcast. We'll invite this guy again.
Okay, yeah, I enjoyed it.
Yeah,
awesome. Thank you.
I enjoyed that too. I enjoyed your questions and great conversation.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Plug your podcast. Plug anything you like. Whatever you guys.
So remember, Fanachu is the podcast for independent Guahan, and we live stream at present every Sunday afternoon, about 2:30, 3 o'clock. And if you sign up as a patron for Patreon, as a Hugwa or Tulu member for $10, $15 a month, you get access to special podcasts such as the Radical History, Secret Guam History podcast, and also Radical Readings.
An extra 30 minutes of content, right?
And if I'm talkative, it's an extra 40 minutes of content.
Yeah.
He's feeling it.
But yeah, and thank you to all of you out there that make independent media, alternative media like Master Random, Fanachu, and others possible. I mean, it's the thing about a democracy is that you can drive the content. If there's a voice out there that's creating the content you like, that's telling the stories you like providing a platform for the voices you want to hear, then support them. And subscribe, donate money. What's it called? Give me that Sinsuli money. Just kidding. Lo sidzus masi.
Thank you guys. Anything else?
I'm good, man. Thanks for having
Yeah,
us.
if you guys want to share this on your podcast too, just let me know and
yeah.
can send you the audio file.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Be a nice cross collaboration sort of episode. Yeah.
Shoot.
Yeah.
Awesome.
And thank you, man. Holy
Awesome.
shit.
Thank you, guys.
Dude.
I'm back on the podcast.
Dude.
Nice.
Dude, it's literally
Like
like
2
been
years.
fucking years.
Yeah, years. It's been years.
And for the first maybe like year that you were like really heavily a part of it, was he was in Hawaii.
Yeah, that's right.
Yep.
Now I remember.
Yeah.
I remember seeing your face on the split screen.
Now.
But
great to be back.
let's
Great to be back.
make this more often, bro.
Sounds good.
All right.
Sounds good.
Yeah, and
Sounds good.
dude, you leave in
2 weeks.
2 weeks. How long are
Less
you
than
gonna be
2
gone
weeks.
for?
This first trip 2 months, but overall like 3 years.
Let
Yeah.
everyone know where you're kind of going and what you're pursuing, dude.
Like the FBI here. I'll be in New Zealand. If you're from Guam, you're Chamorro, whatever, hit me up. I'll be there. North Island. So let me know.
Yeah. Hey, Doc, we didn't get to talk about the stuff that you've been through, but while he's gone, we'll bring you back on.
Oh yeah.
You're in the running for most guest appearances on the podcast.
I know.
You
trying
are.
to win that.
This is number 5 right now.
You should have like a medal or a medallion.
right.
Little file.
A little stamp card.
Yeah. Because it's an honor, especially because you have 100.
I believe you guys are 173 or 174.
Nice.
Matt's been here since 120, so he's about 50 episodes in, and
Nice.
we've all come a long way, man. And I'm excited to see where independent media's gonna take itself and the course it's gonna take. I really think podcasts are important for Guam.
Oh yes.
It encourages conversation and for people it provokes thought. That's how I feel about it, and no matter what you're talking about. But before I talk for another 30-45 minutes, let's get the hell out of here.
Nice.
Thank you everyone for joining us on the podcast. Manny Cruz, Dr. Mike Bevacqua from the Fanachu Podcast. My boy here, TVille. Maddie loves you. Be with the baby. And of course, I love you. And until next time, peace out.
This is Master Random.